5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome everyone. We're in New York City here with Christa Gyori, the co-founder of Leaders on Purpose, and me, your host, Kevin Edwards. Christa, thanks for being with here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Real leaders are for the global goals. How is Leaders on Purpose taking on the global goals? And maybe share with our audience some experiences that led up to this.
Oh, sure. So Leaders on Purpose began in 2015. I had been working for Unilever. My background is 15 years at Unilever. And in 2015, I became engaged with the Harvard School of Public Health and the Global Environment through a program that I was in there. And at that time, the Harvard Business Review came out with their top 100 CEOs. And prior to 2015, the top 100 CEOs were always measured only on financial metrics.
Oh, really?
In 2015, they added a 30% weighting for environmental, social, and governance metrics, and the list radically shifted. So Jeff Bezos, who'd always been at the top, fell down to like 78 on the list. Warren Buffett fell off the list, and we saw the emergence of a new group of CEOs. And we, so my colleague at Harvard and a couple of friends got together, one of our friends at London School of Economics and another from the World Bank, decided, well, let's get a study together to really identify and understand what are these leaders doing differently. So we looked at that list and we did interview some of the CEOs on that list, but we wanted to expand. So we used some of the same measurements that they used, but kind of changed it a bit. We looked at financial metrics. They had to be in the top percentile, 25 percentile for financial metrics, and the top 50 percentile for environmental, social, and governance metrics in their sector. Then we looked at attributed quotes from the CEOs, and we spoke to their teams. We wanted to find the leaders that were actually talking the talk, so that it was that were advocating for this change. And so, that's how we got started. It started as this one study. We launched the study at the IMF World Bank Spring Meetings last year in a CEO summit where we brought those CEO participants together to meet each other, to meet some of the leadership from the World Bank, and really to talk about the findings, but also kind of what's next. Then this year, just a couple of days ago, we came out with the second study, which is building on the findings of that last year. And really our goal is to identify what are some of the best practices, what are some of the transferable things that other organizations can do to meet the goals, to embed them in their strategy. So.
And what are some of the questions, like the identified questions or topics that you ask these CEOs to understand, how to drive, like you said, transformation in other companies as well?
Yeah, such a good question. We break the interview into 4 segments. So the first segment is really looking at what are the big issues of the day that you feel most need to be addressed. Then we kind of go into, well, and how does that impact your strategy? Is this something that that your organization can do something about? And then kind of dive into that. The next segment is really a look at partnerships, because the way things are moving these days, and to address these global goals, we really need partnerships. And so we're really trying to understand what's different about partnerships today, and how the really good partnerships are scaling, and what are some of the mechanisms that need to take place in order for a good partnership to happen. Then the third piece of the interview is really looking at a profit and purpose together, and the role of the unexpected. So we live in a world where, you just never know how you'll be disrupted. And so how are organizations handling this? And the ones that are really thriving are embracing the unexpected and actually training and working to foster more agility within their organization through that. And then the last piece of it is really looking at organizational design. So if you are a purpose-led organization, purpose-driven organization, how does that impact the actual design of your organization? And how does that, and we look at how does the communication and idea flow through an organization to make it more, again, we have to act quickly, so looking at agility.
What are some of the findings then? I mean, you've interviewed a ton of CEOs.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's a volatile world. It's unpredictable.
Yeah.
What are some of the findings that you've been able to, say, pinpoint down and say, hey, this is what is going on, and these are the changes that other companies should be making?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the really exciting findings and very relevant to this discussion is about the SDGs and how business is really taking a different focus. We call it sort of a new business logic we're seeing. So organizations are really focused now, the ones that are at the forefront, beyond just the customer value proposition, they're looking at a systems value proposition, which is a very different way of approaching your business. So looking
Can you
at
elaborate on that systems value proposition?
Yeah, I know it sounds
New topic for me.
but I mean, yeah, it is. It's basically, we're saying we need systems change, meaning that you need to focus on what are the issues that we're facing today are systemic. They're symptoms of a system that's failing in those particular areas. We've been lifted out, many people lifted out of poverty. There's been wonderful progress, but those are some of the areas of systems failure. So, and those are some of the big opportunities that we have out there. So when you're looking at the world through a systems lens, you're understanding, for example, if SDG number 1 if we're able to make that SDG goal of no more poverty by 2030, what does the world look like, and what does your organization, what's your role in the world if that's the case? If we don't make that, what's the case? So looking at scenario thinking from a systems perspective and bringing that into the core strategy of the organization. So we're seeing a lot of that and really around these global goals. And so that's one of the findings. So a systems perspective. And then from that systems perspective, the partnership then aspect of that is changing. So as I said, we have a whole segment of our interview process on partnerships. Yeah, and one of the things that's changing with that is as you're looking to solve a systemic issue, you can't do that alone. No one sector can do that alone, no one company, no one person obviously can do that alone. So we have to partner, and we have to partner quickly. We're opening new markets, and that requires government, it requires relationships with governments, relationships with nonprofits, and the for-profits have to have a role in that, or the corporates have to have a role in that as well. So looking at how partnerships are different, and these pre-competitive partnerships that are coming up where you see Coke and Pepsi coming together to address a water situation. So some of that is really exciting work. There's a lot of work to be done, obviously, but it's nice to see some of these really innovative approaches to things. One of the other really exciting findings is what's driving this. So beyond the fact that that we have these big problems, I think one of the things that we heard so often this year, more than last year, was the word employee popping up over and over. We did a textual analysis, and if we could have had a word cloud, the word employee would have been quite large in that word cloud. And so employees are really driving this. People, we've always known, we've heard for years that people vote with their dollar for, if a company is doing well, they'll buy their products. But now we're seeing employees are kind of voting with their talent, right? They're going to organizations that are addressing these global goals. They want to be part of something that is, and part of an organization that's doing good. So that's a really exciting aspect of this as well. So looking at how that's, playing into all of this long-winded answer.
Well, they want to be a part of your purpose.
They want to be a part of purpose.
They want to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And when you look at those systems, let's take the digital divide right now. Digital divide, for people unaware, is for people, say, in marginalized areas, marginalized markets, emerging markets, who don't have access to that technology. So the system in, say, let's take a continent like Africa, and the system there has created a big pay gap, big wealth and equity gap. And so now what you're saying is you're using the global goals to kind of work with partnerships and these leaders to say, hey, how do we think about raising these people out of poverty? And if we don't do anything about it, how is that going to affect our business? And then so you go into these areas, and with this being such a complicated issue, now I'm just saying, it's technology, but there's so many factors that go into that. How do you start? How do you identify that problem?
Yeah.
And is there a set starting place where you need to go? And what are some of the conversations you're having with these leaders?
Yeah, that's such a good question and such a good point. I think that's the big question everyone has, is where do I start? But the nice thing is that probably 86% of all organizations now have a sustainability reporting mechanism where they're looking at their impacts. It used to be sort of a nice to have, a pretty little side brochure, but now organizations are more and more recognizing that that's a good starting place. This is where all of the negative impacts are. These are the areas where we have the biggest footprint, and that's a good place to start. So, understand what your impacts are, and from there, set goals. Try to understand what your core capacity is. What is it that you're best at delivering? So this is no longer checkbook philanthropy. This is a business proposition. So understanding, where you have the best core capacity to contribute. This is now a new license to operate in the regions that we're working in. So that's typically where people start. And then, there's many places it can go from there.
This is a little bit of a side topic, less about leaders and leaders on purpose, but poverty, no poverty.
Yeah.
Especially, let's just take like the United States, for example. Still plenty of people in poverty. But if you look at 100 years ago, if you were to say to someone in 1919, this is someone in poverty today, they might look at you like, what do you mean? They have a cell phone, they have access to the internet, they have a microwave, they have electricity, they live in a nice house. Are we looking at poverty? I mean, I guess, how do you look at poverty? Is it more of a mindset? And obviously we want to bring people out of it, but is there always going to be poverty, I feel like? Will there always be 100 years from now, people will be looking at us like we lived in poverty? I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have a take on that?
Yeah, it's a bit beyond the scope of the study and my work itself, but I think if you look at the system that we're in, so again, back at the system, I think that there was a survey that went out by Gallup, I think a couple of years ago, where they talked about poverty. It was the same question that you had, and they interviewed a large group of people, and I think what they found was that people, that the disparity between the very rich and the very poor, I think that people in general believe that there'll be some disparity, but the fact that we have such disparities, and it's growing, right? So I think if you looked at there's the Gini coefficient for every country that sort of that tracks the poverty levels and the disparity between the very wealthy and the very poor. It's as you're starting to get closer together, it's not that everybody is we have everybody living in the exact same socioeconomic strata, but basically looking at a good mixture where you have a healthy middle class, where people have the opportunity to get an education, the opportunity to work hard and to make have a retirement and those sorts of things. And there's a social safety net for people when they do become unemployed, frictional unemployment, whatever that is. I think that that's the sign of a healthy society. And there may be some people that are that are a little less well off than others, but this disparity, I think, is an area of real growing concern, and a sign of the systemic issues that we're needing to address.
And so you might be focusing on these leaders, say, hey, your decision is going, let's think about how your decision is going to impact society and the environment for generations to come.
Yeah.
And that can maybe close the gap, because we're so interconnected. Everything that you make today, this conversation might impact maybe even one person, let's hope. And that decision can, trickle on, and it's like this crazy world that we live in, and I don't think people understand how interconnected we are.
Yeah, I think that's true. One of the things I will say, just to circle back, is that what we are seeing from organizations is that there's now a new sense of ownership within the organization. So Siemens, for example, is one of the organizations that we interviewed. and I think like 78% of their employees have stock in the company, are owners of the company. I think that we're starting to see organizations try to address the gap through ownership of the company. We're seeing a lot more of that as well. So, back to what are, a slight tangent, but I did want to bring that up. Based on our research, we are seeing a lot more of that happening within the organization. Siemens came to mind first, but many of the organizations have similar initiatives where they're employee owners.
Would you elaborate for our audience when you say the ownership? Is this lower pay wages? Is this taking down their salary? Is this putting money back into stakeholders? What do you mean by this?
Yeah. So there's a variety of different things that they're doing. But Siemens, for example, have stock in the company. Okay. So they're actual owners of the company. Okay. But there are a lot of other things, a lot of other mechanisms. One of the things that we see purpose-driven organizations doing is really paying close attention to their employees and creating thoughtful, employee benefits. So not only just stock options and that sort of thing, but, really thinking about, a plan, employees plan based on their, where they are and where they want to be, a plan for growth within the organization, training, all sorts of really amazing benefits. Barry Rafferty was one of the CEOs we interviewed. She's with Ketchum Omnicom and talked about extensively, and we put it in our report, some of the things that they're doing really to listen to what employees want around diversity, around, some parental support that they can give them. And so there's some really remarkable work being done to support employees in a variety of ways. Ownership is one of them.
Well, Chris, we talked a lot today.
Yeah,
we talked a lot about, we've kind of gone everywhere. I told you this conversation will go anywhere.
That's good.
But the main point I'm getting back is like that purpose, that initial idea to create value not only for your profits, your pockets, but also for your people, the community that they live in, their families, and then as well as the environment for years to come.
Yeah.
Lastly, what advice do you have? We've talked a lot. You've learned a lot. You've interviewed a lot of people, probably more than I have.
Yeah.
What advice do you have?
Don't
listen to me. What advice does Christa Gyori have for our audience today and leaders watching this?
Yeah, I would say, really if you're looking for a place to start, really look at your impacts. I think that's what we're hearing. Understand where your impacts are and think about what your role is to create, value and contribute to the welfare of society. And when you find that, where that is, that's really where your purpose is around. So I know a lot of organizations try to say that their purpose is their why, but we think it's really about the purpose is the ambition to create value by contributing to the welfare of society. I mean, that's really where the new purpose is, and that's really different from shareholder value, but that's where I think we're going, and that's the new capitalism reimagined.
Reimagining things is a trait of leadership. Yeah. Christa, what's your definition of a real leader?
Yeah, I would say everyone has the potential to be a real leader. It's not where you sit within your organization. It's really about, bringing your best to what you're doing, being aware of the impacts that you have out there, and, just trying to leave the place a little better than you came into it with. Is that? I don't think that came off.
No, I get that. Yeah. Anyone can be a leader.
That quote, about try to leave the world a little better than you came into it with. That is absolutely not the quote.
It's something like leave the world better than you found it, maybe?
Than you found it, yeah.
Just like, yeah, exactly. If you come into a place, you want to leave it better than you found it.
Yeah, and I think people look at each other. Everyone is a role model for someone. Yeah. If it's your kids, if it's your community, the people that you work with. I mean, I think how you show up every day and what you contribute really inspires people. And so I think everyone has the potential to be a real leader.
Well, Chris, I think you're a role model for everyone here at Real Leaders. So we appreciate you.
Thank you so
For
much.
Christa Gyori, I'm Kevin Edwards, telling you all to go out there, be a role model. You can be a leader too. It doesn't matter your position or your role in your company. And always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Christa.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Appreciate it.
for having me.